Alright, so in this session, we're going to talk about logging. Okay, so I think we've already done a bit of logging and error handling before, but we're going to sort of make it more sober this time. Okay, now as far as logs are concerned, so there are two kinds of logs basically on for any kind of web server. So one is the access log, okay, and another one is the error logs. So access log kind of actually uh, stores the information that is specific to the access, the request being made to the server. So it's going to it's going to keep the information such as what time the request was made, what was the method, what was the host, the server host, what was the URI being accessed, what was the user agent, what was the IP of the client, what was the status response status code, what was the error if there was any, and what was the latency, how much time it took for the request to be fulfilled. So those are the things that would usually go into an access log. And then there's another kind of log that is error logs where we would store just the error log information, and that would be more in terms of what the server was behaving like when the request is being made and it is failing. Okay, so both of those logs are handy for any administrator who wants to troubleshoot what's wrong or what's happening with the server. And so we are going to uh, do introduce access log in this session as well. So there's a middleware for that, and that's why I've gone ahead and made the changes here. So I'm using a middleware. Middleware is logger with config. Okay, and in this logger with config, you can actually declare a config struct that has got a bunch of fields in it. So one of them is format. So in this format, you can define what format the logs file are going to be like. Okay. There is a custom time format if you want some custom time format. Usually, the log parsing tools such as Splunk and Logz, they behave differently to different kind of log formats, and sometimes they also help you prepare dashboards according to that. And sometimes you have your custom tools that parse the times in a different way, right? And then you got an output field. If you want to write output, if you want to write log files to your local file system, then you could use this. You could give it a file reference, os.file reference, and it would write to it. Okay. There's a sample format here, and you can pick it up and you can make use of that. I've picked up some of those fields, not all of them, and I've created my own custom logger format. So, for example, this is for the time. This is going to record the IP that is making the request, the IP of the client. This is the host onto which the request is going to land. It's not the client host, it's the server host, because you could have multiple hosts serving the same application, right? So you want to know which uh, particular system it landed on, right? And then you got a method such as get, put, delete, right? URI, which particular endpoint, products ID or products, right? User agent, what agent was being used? Was it browser? Was it Insomnia, curl, what? Status of the response, then error if there's any. If there's no, it's not gonna print anything. So these are fields defined by the framework, and you can just use them by prefixing them with dollar and curly braces. All right. And at the end, it's also important to print a new line, because then this is meant for one particular request, and it's also going to append a new line to it. So if you make two subsequent requests, they'll be printed on two separate lines. All right, so that's one thing that I've gone ahead and did. Then back in the products log, products.go file, I've gone ahead and made a small change onto the signature of every private function that we had. All right, so every private function was returning an error as the final return value, right? So I've changed it to echo HTTP error. Okay, so now those functions are going to return every time there's an error. They are going to find out what needs to be returned, and they'll return it accordingly. All right. So I'll go ahead and take an example of one of these methods, and I think you'll be able to figure it out for other methods. And of course, sometimes you also have to handle some of it in your main handler function as well. So for example, in create products, I don't call insert products until here. Okay. So before that, I also have to do a little bit of error handling, some bit of processing. So I return uh, the echo HTTP error object directly. All right. So let me explain it through this modify example. I think that's a perfect candidate. It's got a little bit of stuff there. So when you want to modify the product using the put method, okay, so then when you receive the payload for updating and you will receive the parameter string, you want to validate that first. So if it is anything that is not a valid ID, then it's gonna complain that it cannot convert to it, and we return 500 with this message. If the ID is valid, but then you get the product that you're not able to decode, that means basically the product was not found, so you return status not found. If the product was uh, returned, but now we are parsing it to the payload that was sent to us using request body, then that means the request that was being sent was not valid because we just validated it. No, we just actually the request payload that was sent was not in proper format, as in bad JSON or something. So we say that we are not able to parse this payload. We return with 404. The same way, if we are not able to validate, then we also return 404 because it's bad request. You're not keeping the data in line with the rules that we have for the struct. Okay, and at the end, if we are not able to update the product, then this is where we return 500 as well. And this is something related to database. This example, I won't be able to simulate it because we have a working copy of the database. But I'll be able to simulate these examples, and let me just go ahead and do it now. Okay, so let me run this application. The application is running. All right, so let's try by creating one product first of all. Okay, now let's see, let's we do the send, and it says unable to validate the request payload. And that's because I have a very high price that is outside of the contract here on purpose for price. Okay, if we go back to here, you can see that there are two kinds of logs. So one is from our product. Okay, so this is where we print the message that unable to validate the product, and then it prints the product that is there, that is being sent by the user, right? And then we can later on find out. And the second one is actually the access log. So you got time, host, okay, then you got localhost and then port 8080. This is your client because for me, client and server both are the same. You got method, URI, client, response code, error message, and then you got the latency time, right? So that's what I wanted to show for the access log. Okay, now we go back here, we corrected this, so let's do it again, and we get a valid ID, right? Now we're gonna make a put request, and we're gonna modify this existing product. Okay, now if I send an ID that is just kind of crazy, okay, it's gonna complain that it's unable to convert to object ID. Okay, when I send a valid object ID, but that just has a little change, for example, what was it, 6, right? And I'm just going to change it to 7. Then it complains that it's unable to find the product. Okay, let me change it back to 6. Now, because it's a put request, I should be sending just a single product, not an array of product, right? So when I do this, so this is bad JSON for me right now, right? So I'm just going to send this, and it says that unable to parse because it's expecting an object, it's getting an array, right? When I even send bad JSON, it's going to complain the same. Okay. When I send a valid JSON, but I do something with the currency which is invalid, it's gonna complain it's unable to validate the request payload, right? So that's how you handle the error messages as well. And that's exactly what I've done at all the places here. And then you get the logs nice and clean, right? So that's all we wanted to see in this session. And see you in the next session.